Good morning. Welcome to our home, and thank you all for coming to the celebration of Lee's wonderful life. Most of you have been here before, as we had a ridiculous holiday party for about 20 of our 27 years here with over 300 people. This has also been the venue for 3 weddings, Lee's retirement party, and hundreds of other smaller events. When we considered how to safely host a memorial for Lee, we knew it had to be here. He loved to gather friends and family together, and he loved his property. As Lee became ill, his son and son-in-laws began mowing the fields, and they marveled at how he managed to keep track of all of this, particularly during the years when he was working full-time. Our entire family, and in particular Lee, was very careful during COVID. He was the first in line to be vaccinated. He always wore his mask and avoided any indoor activities, even if that meant missing out on his Monday night dinners with his buddies. We have 6 grandchildren, ages 5 and under, who are not eligible to be immunized yet. And as most of you know, my life's work is in early education. So tomorrow, I will be in the company of 125 children under the age of 5. Their parents count on me to ensure their health and safety, so we are very appreciative of you being willing to wear a mask today, even though we're out of doors. As Italians, it is our custom to hug and kiss everybody, and if you knew Lee, you knew that was certainly his impulse. Today, we will control that impulse, so don't be offended if we don't hug and kiss you. And we urge you not to hug and kiss each other. But that doesn't mean that we are not deeply appreciative of the many gestures of kindness. The cards, the masses, the gifts of food and flowers, the beautiful notes, the texts checking on us, and the calls. We recently had a meeting with Rutgers University, and they tell us that there is already $8,400 in Lee's fund. We know he would love that, and I know he would tell me to tell you that it's never too late to donate. After Lee retired 7 years ago, he remained active in the field of juvenile justice, and he had the utmost respect and genuine affection for Dr. Jennifer LeBaron. Dr. J, as he called her, is currently the acting executive director of the Juvenile Justice Commission, but their work together was not limited to the JCC. Dr. LeBaron received her bachelor's degree from Georgetown University and her MA and PhD in criminal justice from Rutgers University. She is the recipient of 2 New Jersey Attorney General Awards for Excellence in Innovation, the W. Haywood Burns Institute's Courageous Leadership Award, and the Annie E. Casey Foundation's Award for Outstanding Contributions to Juvenile Detention Reform. Dr. LeBaron and Judge Forrester were kindred spirits in this field. It's with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Jennifer LeBaron.
Good morning, friends. I am truly honored and humbled to have been asked by the Forrester family to share some remarks this morning regarding my dear friend, the Honorable Lee Forrester. Lisa, Amber, Brittany, and Randy, please continue to accept my most heartfelt sympathy on the loss of your father and husband, and thank you for your kind and supportive words of condolence to me and to so many others during this time. Your kindness, compassion, and thoughts of others when you are personally experiencing such profound sorrow, well, it must be a Forrester family trait, because it's exactly how we walked through this world, leading with kindness, with caring, and with selflessness. So let me start with my Judge Forrester origin story. All of his friends have one, I'm sure. It must have been around 1999 or 2000, And I was just a couple of years into my career with the Juvenile Justice Commission, and I was on a team implementing a program that would award monies to county to develop alternatives to incarceration for youth. This JJC team consulted with a team of experts from different arenas within youth justice. And again, being young and still greenish, when I walked into that room of experts, I was somewhere on the spectrum between starstruck and intimidated. I was like, wow, these are important people. These are the titans of juvenile justice in New Jersey. And of course, Judge Forrester was there, because if you needed to talk to a judge about juvenile justice, Judge Forrester was the judge to talk to. And in the meeting, and for the next 20 plus years that I knew Lee, the reasons why he was the juvenile judge were never lost on me. I remained starstruck throughout my friendship with him, because he was indeed a superstar. And I quickly realized there was no need to be intimidated. From the get-go, Judge Forrester's ego-less, inclusive approach to working with others would shine through. Though I also remember when I started bringing evaluation data to the table for that program, Judge Forrester might have been just a little bit disgruntled by the notion that I was grading him or issuing him a report card. But he got over that. And with time, grew to become a bit of a data aficionado himself. Okay, aficionado might be stretching it, but the point is that all of us saw Lee live the belief that there is always opportunity to grow and learn, even when it came to data, and he did so with patience and with kindness. Truth be told, I was a small fish in that pond that day, and I'd venture to guess that if Lee told his Dr. J origin story or reflected on a distinct memory of me, it might be a little bit different. It might be the time, maybe around 2006, when we were holding our annual 2-day JDAI conference, where the first day of the conference always concluded with happy hour, or several happy hours in the hotel lobby bar. And those happy hours were spent enthusiastically discussing youth justice policy. I remember Judge Forrester and I getting in a heated discussion over the use of detention for kids, just debating the sort of Hobson's choice presented to a judge between detention and release, when systems designed to help and to protect kids have failed to do so. When I say it was a heated discussion, I probably mean that I was heated, as Lee never really showed signs of getting totally wound up. But I did, or at least I certainly did in that moment, especially after a couple of glasses of wine. And I think I was at the point of the shaky voice and the glistening eyes threatening to spill over. I share this somewhat embarrassing story of my own loss of control in a conversation, admittedly due to it being happy hour at this point, not so happy hour, because in this interaction, Lee didn't see a crazy person losing control. What I'm sure he saw, because he always saw the best in people, was a passionate advocate fighting for her principles. I learned a lot from Lee about remaining cool, calm, and collected in my zealotry from that moment and from many subsequent moments over the years. I learned a lot from him about how to fight for one's principles, because Lee fought steadfastly for his principles, but he fought for them with respect, honor, and above all else, kindness towards all who came into his orbit. He showed me great kindness that day and great respect. Truly, being a partner on policy matters with Lee brought me great joy. A, because it was fun to brainstorm and develop ideas with him as the self-proclaimed policy wonk that he was. And B, because I knew if I was working with Lee, we would succeed. Failure was never an option when Lee was working on improving practice that impacted kids. By way of example, because of Lee's strategic persistence and partnership, we totally overhauled the practice of trying children as adults and housing them in adult prisons in New Jersey. This is miraculous. And while many others have publicly taken credit for the law, formerly known as Senate Bill 2003, and they should, as it took a team, but make no mistake, the genesis of that reform was the waiver work group of the Council on Juvenile Justice System Improvement, and Lee was the co-chair of the CJJSI at the time and a driving force behind launching the waiver work group and the problem-solving conversations that occurred in that space. Together, we worked to write a comprehensive report about reforming the practice of waiving youth to adult court. But alas, that beautiful report went nowhere, literally nowhere. The timing wasn't right. But that didn't stymie Lee, because again, for him, failure was not an option. His retirement was right around the corner, and while he gave up the black robe when he retired, he did not give up the work. Indeed, absent the black robe, he could advocate in new ways. He could truly be that policy wonk. And so he shot the concepts in that report that had gone nowhere, talking with legislators and advocates, navigating, collaborating, giving and taking. Lisa, I believe this House might have been host to a couple of meetings of the team working on that legislation. I hope they weren't too rowdy in their deliberations. You never know what a group of passionate policy wonks might stir up. And Lee and I were back and forth on the phone endlessly about this. I distinctly recall being in a parking lot somewhere in South Jersey, on the phone with Lee, working through last-minute bill amendments in order to get it right. And he kept at it with unwavering persistence until we had the bill that would change the lives of thousands of children well into the future. Lee's persistence came in other forms too. I think many of us wished he wouldn't have been quite so persistent in his use of that West Side Story video clip in the presentations he gave. A, because technology wasn't his strength, I'm guessing his family knows that. And so invariably somewhere, someone was troubleshooting the video that wouldn't play midway through an otherwise eloquently crafted presentation on his part. And B, because if we had to hear the lessons of youth justice as told by the Sharks and the Jets one more time, well, I don't know what I'd do. I suppose those quirky movie references were all part of Lee's charm. Lee's charm was also his generosity. He led with generosity. Generosity of spirit, generosity of kindness, and fortunately for those who traveled and dined with him, generosity of his taste in wine. Whether it was a group debrief at the bar after a long day of youth justice meetings, or a group dinner in New Orleans or Dallas when traveling for a youth justice conference, Lee would subtly pull the server over, peek at the wine list, order for those around him, and pick up the check. Sorry, Lisa. I say it was generosity. Perhaps it was simply because he didn't trust anyone else to order halfway decent wine. But in either case, it was always appreciated. Again, this generosity is clearly a Forrester family value. We all saw the Forrester family generosity on display in the form of your legendary parties. And I, like so many others, knew I was in when that first Forrester Christmas party invitation showed up in my mailbox. And I, like so many others, was blown away by the feast, the tree, the activities for kids, the crowd, and most importantly, the welcoming warmth that entering the Forrester house brings to all who cross its threshold. Lee was generous in sharing all of this with us, with his colleagues turned friends. And again, I'm honored to count myself as one of those lucky people. When Lee announced his retirement, I sat in front of a room of about 60 people, including Lee, and told everyone how difficult it was going to be to try to articulate what Judge Forrester meant to the court system, to his colleagues, to the quest for fulfilling the promise of a truly separate system of justice for children in this state, to countless children and families, and to me, personally and professionally. I admitted to the group at that time that I
Make your what?
Presence felt.
He didn't coin the phrase, but it was Dad's idea to embed it. And the concept was woven slowly but intricately into the fabric of our family to the point that none of us can quite remember the first time we answered the question. Make your what was and is a grammatically cumbersome question that hits the ear awkwardly, and he knew it. But Dad adored a good call and response. And so on we went. It was most often said at school drop-off or when either you or he was about to walk out the door in the morning. He meant it to serve as a reminder to stay present in our school days. And for a long time, I thought that when directed at me in particular, it was about raising my hand in class and knowing the answers to the queries of my teachers. Later, I came to realize it was never about being the loudest person in the room. In fact, Dad employed the opposite technique. When you were engaged in an argument, as we often were, he would maintain his composure to an infuriating degree and would lower his voice to the extent that to even hear his point of view, you'd have no choice but to settle down and come closer. I'm not particularly proud to say that it took me more than 2 decades to recognize his strategy. And when I pointed out to him that I was on to him, he simply smiled, like so, and said, "Your presence need not shout." It led to a discussion of why the phrase mattered to him enough to ingrain it in us all. And he told me then that if your presence doesn't make an impact, your absence will not matter. Born in Trenton in 1950 to Leon, an Arkansan man of hotly debated heritage, and Phyllis, a first-generation Italian-American woman, Dad was known throughout his formative years as Little Lee. He was an only child, and it showed. As we three were growing up, he was regularly confounded by our sibling behavior. He'd never truly had to compete for his parents' attention, nor could he understand the innate joy in sneaking in a pinch or a shove and not getting caught. The closest he came to a sister was his older cousin Sandy, the daughter of his mother's sister Edith. They spent many summers together at their grandmother's house, and she graciously allowed him to tag along with her and her friends as they grew up, never letting him feel less than welcome. Of course, that means having Sandy was even better than having a real sister, who would obviously never have treated him so well. He attended parochial schools, as did so many in the predominantly Italian neighborhood of Chambersburg, where he was raised. About halfway through high school, his grades faltered, and his parents decided that a private all-boys school in Hightstown was the way to return his focus to where it ought to be. He never gave up his hometown friendships, though, and he retained many to his very last day. Despite departing St. Anthony's to begin his junior year at Petty just as she entered her freshman year there, Dad also never relinquished his schoolboy crush on the cheerleader who would eventually become his wife. Mom and Dad married in 1979 and were both employed in the service of children. She as a public school teacher, he as a public defender. They soon realized, however, that if they intended to have any children of their own, there would need to be a significant economic shift. A son of entrepreneurs, Dad had always harbored a desire to have a business of his own. And at the intersection of a vehicle in which Mom could use all of her talents and a safe place for potential offspring to be kept close at hand, the Harmony School was born. One school became 6. Together, our parents formed a veritable power couple, giving back to their community and simultaneously being honored for their contributions. Many still wonder to this day what business Dad and Mom had moving us from our manageable house in West Trenton on its 1-acre lot to this nearly 70-acre farm in Hopewell in the early 1990s. They were, after all, exceptionally busy people with full-time and very responsible jobs,
a fast-growing and thriving small business, and 3 delightful cherubs to raise. Neither had ever owned a pet larger than a 60-pound dog, nor even planted a small garden, and yet these city kids set out for the farm life. Mom surely had her misgivings, but at that point she'd been married to Dad for long enough to know he was an idea man. It was often wiser, to say nothing of less exhausting, to lean into his scheme and to resist. In her, he had a perfect partner, a person he could excite with a creative notion, plot steps to get her cautiously on board, and then rely strenuously upon to execute his vision. The truth, however, is that this particular house had to be theirs for a very specific reason. The 2-story addition, built by the previous owners, that boasts a floor-to-ceiling window facing the street that could only ever rightly be filled by a truly enormous Christmas tree. Dad was born on Christmas Eve, and while so many December babies resent getting short shrift due to a birthday during a seemingly ubiquitous holiday season, he delighted in every aspect of the festivities. While other children were informed in early elementary school, either by their peers or their parents, of the genesis of the presents they received, he actively worked to keep us believing in the magic of St. Nicholas. When we were 9 and 11, Dad sat me and Brittany down, afraid that he'd let it go on too long, and read us a dozen Yuletide books, culminating in Yes, Virginia, There is a Santa Claus. His voice caught in his throat and his eyes were wet when he finished and confessed that our gifts were purchased by him and Mom. We admitted that we had thought so and professed a steadfast belief in the jolly old elf, notwithstanding this news, and swore vehemently not to tell Randy, cross our hearts. As we've perused photos of Dad in the past few weeks, it's hard not to notice his increasingly white beard, which he allowed to grow a bit longer in retirement. Because so many of his grandchildren were enamored with it, we have amassed a great many pictures of our kids tugging his whiskers. As he was beginning August, Dad was taking daily selfies, and what we've deduced was an effort to document anticipated hair loss. For the life of me, I can't help but see Santa Claus in his smiling face and hear his voice reading to us. Not believe in Santa Claus? You might as well not believe in fairies. You might get your papa to hire men to watch in all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus, but even if they did not see Santa Claus coming down, what would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus, but that is no sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that neither children nor men can see. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not, but that's no proof that they are not there. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders there are, unseen and unseeable, in the world. Over the years, many people sent their children to speak to Dad about the prospect of applying to law school. And I remember seeing a number of these young people leaving our house. Their parting words: "Thanks, Judge Forrester, you're so right. A career in music production is what's right for me." I'd run into the room where he was sitting after whomever he'd been speaking to had gone and scold him. "Dad, you know Mrs. So-and-so sent him here to talk about going to law school." And he would answer something to the effect that he was always happy to have a conversation with a young person about his or her passions, and that's just what he'd done. All throughout college, I waited and waited for that talk, and for him to attempt to quietly convince me that I'm on if he was surprised, and pull up a chair to listen to my plans. In hindsight, it strikes me that in both instances, his silence was signaling his assent. Though very affectionate and known to gush about our accomplishments to others, Dad wasn't the effusive cheerleader parent, constantly verbalizing how proud he was of us or present at every game or meet. After all, as many of you well remember, his court day almost never ended until hours after they had stopped letting people in the building. But now that each of us is a parent, his single most valuable parenting technique is evident. Dad was the person to whom we could bring our biggest problem without fear of reproach or penalty. He let us know at an early age that if we encountered a scenario that concerned us, calling him would mean being quickly and discreetly removed from the situation, not reprisal for being so entangled in the first place. Dad was true to his word, and he would and did pick up every one of us on more than one occasion, no questions asked. In recent weeks, we've heard from so many people from all aspects of his life that he was a giant, a lion. And while none of us would dispute those notions, to us he was just Dad. And like so many other children do to their parents, growing up we spent a great deal of time teasing him and rolling our eyes at the things that he did. One time we were making fun, the sort that he'd have been more understanding of if he'd been raised with siblings. And he sputtered, "You know, there are a lot of people who actually think I'm pretty smart." Obnoxious teenagers being obnoxious teenagers, we mocked that statement too, of course. Imagine our chagrin having heard today from so many eloquent speakers that once again, and predictably so, he was quite right. We're proud of his accomplishments, no doubt, but it's almost impossible, particularly at a young age, to fathom your parents outside the context of their roles related to yourself. When he was nominated to the Superior Court, Brittany, Randy, and I were 4, 7, and 9, respectively. And during that process, to us, he seemed a bit removed from what was happening around him, even when we were on vacation on Long Beach Island in the summer of 1992. I recall riding our bikes with Mom to the little deli a few blocks from the house we were renting, flipping to the second or third page of the Trentonian, and reading the words, "West Trenton man appointed to Superior Court bench." We rushed back to the house to tell him, and it was only then that his distraction broke. In later years, he described his appointment to the bench as both his highest honor and something he never knew he always wanted. He claimed to have never pictured being a judge when he was a young lawyer, and that when a dear friend first raised the idea to him, he was flattered, but somewhat dismissive, thinking that the notion itself was a lark. But as he mused about what he might accomplish in that role, he began to form an attachment to the objective. Dad was an avid reader of presidential biographies, even though it would take him forever to get through the tomes. One of his personal favorite subjects was Teddy Roosevelt, who said, "Far and away the best gift life offers is the chance to work hard at work worth doing." As many of you can and have attested, as a judge, Dad found many willing collaborators on his numerous ideas of how to improve the lives of children in New Jersey, particularly those who had been involved in the juvenile justice system. To him, it was the very definition of work worth doing. In New Jersey criminal cases, the caption of the case is State of New Jersey versus John Doe. But in juvenile matters, the caption is State in the interest of JD. While the same laws are utilized and there's an adversarial process involved, it was always of the utmost importance to Dad that every member of the team understood that the work they undertook wasn't simply criminal law for kids, and never lost sight of whose interest brought them all together. He joked that retiring from the judiciary would free him up to accept his dream job as the commissioner of Major League Baseball, or at the very least, general manager of the New York Yankees. In reminiscing about the way he spoke of the many component parts of the Mercer County Juvenile Court, about the painstaking efforts made to find the exact right fit for each utility role, and the occasional need to replace a retiring star, it's almost as though he was managing a baseball team all along. The concept of innocent until proven guilty, particularly familiar in legal circles, was not just applicable to Dad's role as a judge. It permeated his professional and personal life. He felt that people shouldn't have to begin at a deficit and earn points to be held in his esteem, but rather he adopted the attitude that those he encountered were worthy of a high opinion from him at the start, and unless and until they proved otherwise. He was only human after all, and so worked hard at never harboring preconceived notions of people and allowing everyone an opportunity to show themselves for who they were. He was determined to find the best in people, but in turn also expected the best of people. More often than not, people delivered him their best in return. Dad's daily call to arms will never leave us, not least because we all have the words hanging in our homes. Although he was acutely aware of the impetus of one's legacy, I don't know that even he could have predicted how deeply the message would influence each of us. It's only now that we are grappling with the enormity of his absence that the true impact of his presence has been brought into stark relief. But it wouldn't have been Dad not to bookend our days. With very rare exception, and no doubt every inch as important as the herald of our mornings, each night we were ushered to sleep with a familiar refrain. Who loves us?
We do.
Who do we love?
Us.
How much?
Big bunches, too much, not enough.
Many of you have Lee stories to share. And as long as we share those stories with each other, his spirit lives on in us. I have some special thank yous and some shout outs to some MVPs. Sam Plummerine, who in addition to being Lee's lifelong friend, is chairperson of the board at Capitol Health. Lee received wonderful care there, not because he's Sam's friend, but because Sam's leadership contributes to the atmosphere of excellence that permeates every aspect of that program. To Frank and Merdino, Brenna Funeral Home, it brought me great comfort to know that you would take care of everything and that you would make me and Randy an excellent cup of espresso. Your professionalism, sense of humor, and friendship will long be remembered. To the Mercer County Sheriff's Department, who is here today to honor Lee and to help us. To Donna Coppola, who was invaluable to us, and we often refer to her as Lee's third daughter. To the Praticos, the Balderosis, and the DePastinas, who are more family than friends, for your texts, your calls, the food, the prayers, and up until yesterday, Frank Balderosi buying me extra trash cans and the appropriate size trash liners. To our Harmony School family, to our Petty School family, to our Villanova family, and to Lynn and Alan Zamparelli, with whom we have shared every life event for over 40 years. I love you guys. If you haven't had refreshments, please come and have refreshments. Come read these beautiful letters. Enjoy the photographs of family and friends from many gatherings here from over the years. Thank you so, so much for your friendship and your love. Lee appreciates it. He's smiling down on us now. Thank you. Excellent job, everybody. Couldn't ask for more. I chose wisely, right?